It is time to become tired of being among the ignorant ones. If you're one of those among us that assigns our plight to a Bible written by our most ungodliest enemies and believes that we're being controlled by a silly slave syndrome myth, which presents what would in fact be the least effective method used for controlling generations of people, if either of these are your beliefs, it's because you are in fact profoundly ignorant. And that ignorance is what gives the white oppressors their greatest power over us. I will not be silenced to appease your ignorance when that ignorance is what prevents our liberation. Unless you study the true science of social engineering, you will never understand the truth of our plight and condition. Social engineering is a term which has been used to mean top-down efforts to influence particular attitudes and social behaviors on a large scale, most often undertaken by the government, in order to produce desired characteristic within a targeted population. White oppressive forces now uses the science of social engineering to covertly negatively steer the black culture. A social science fact is that those who write the people's narratives and that control their media images are able to steer their culture. Because people's behaviors aligns with the narratives they've accepted about themselves. And people also often imitate those derogatory media depictions of their group that they've accepted as being their true reality. Therefore, accordingly and logically, those who write the people's narratives and control their media images are able to steer their culture. Because the white society writes the black population's narratives and controls our media images, white oppressive forces exploit these factors to covertly negatively steer our culture and brainwash our minds. Black ignorance of this fact is the white oppressor's greatest power over us. White society covertly socially engineers the African American culture. Is the true reason why our culture has fundamentally changed since the 1960s in ways that are against our own self-interest and instead in ways benefiting the system of white supremacy. Case, point, and proof. During the 1960s, African Americans implemented the most successful unified protest in U.S. history. Today, we're now more divided than at any previous time in U.S. history. During the 1960s, we unanimously agreed that white oppressive forces were our worst enemies. Today, millions of us are now insisting that it's ourselves that are now our worst enemies. During the 1960s, we called ourselves brothers and sisters, and we called our oppressors crackers. Today, we're calling ourselves by the N-word, and we're calling them white people. Clearly, we're respecting ourselves much lesser and respecting them much more. These changes within our culture since the 1960s also includes sagging our pants, glorifying pimps, and we revere our oppressors in spite of such a brutally horrific history of the contrary. These profound changes within the African American culture that clearly benefit the system of white supremacy are all by deliberate design. Given the unprecedented unified black protest movement of the 1960s, it was determined that the African American culture had to be fundamentally changed in ways more beneficial to the white society. They achieved this objective by deploying an ideological subversion system against the entire African American population. Ideological subversion is an offensive psychological warfare tool that uses disinformation, misinformation, and repetitive media subliminal manipulation to manipulate targeted populations who think and behave in ways that are against their own self-interest and instead in ways serving the interests of those that are deploying the ideological subversion system. The purpose is to attack the targeted population in a bid to destabilize and undermine their entire ideological structure. To restate this more simply, it's a process of using disinformation to brainwash a targeted population to think and behave in ways that are against their own self-interest. There are 4 ways to effectively brainwash an entire generation of people: by what they are taught, by what they see, by what they hear, and through repetition. Because the white society controls the education we're taught, the media images that we see, and the societal narratives that we repetitively hear, white oppressive forces have exploited these factors to negatively steer and brainwash the African American population. They've also spread so much disinformation into our communities that we are more divided and confused than at any previous time in history. During the 1960s, we unanimously agreed that we were from Africa. Today, millions of African Americans now argue among ourselves that we're not from Africa, although countless millions of us have taken DNA analysis that have scientifically confirmed our African identity. The goal of the white oppressors is to spread so much disinformation into the black community until virtually everything believed by the black population are lies that hinders our ability to unify and liberate ourselves. It confuses the black population to such an extent that no one is able to come to any sensible conclusion in the interest of liberating ourselves from white oppression. There's more. The white media's unrelenting negative depiction of the black population that amplifies the negative to the point that it distorts our reality is much more than just biased media reporting. It is actually an insidious black racially demoralizing divide and rule psychological warfare campaign. It's a method of maintaining control over a targeted population through constant and unrelenting demoralization in order to create self-hatred and division between the targeted population. This psychological warfare system works by perpetually subjecting black people to receiving only the fraudulent and worst narratives about ourselves. It's a well-proven tactic used for controlling targeted population. People are easily controlled by the information that they receive about themselves. When people constantly receive negative information about themselves, they become demoralized, divided, self-loathing, and it shifts their collective aggressions away from their oppressors and redirects it towards themselves. And as long as we're kept within this condition, we can then be ruled over forever. This system utilizes the immense power that shame has upon the human mind to mentally enslave millions of black people. Those black people who do not critically think never notices their mental chains. The white media has always represented a tyranny of the white society's power over black people. Using these noted social sciences provides white oppressive forces with a more proficient ways of controlling and subjugating black people. For unlike the past blatant racist segregation tactics used in the past, which we were able to easily identify and develop counter strategies against, this modern system is not easily recognized, nor is it easily comprehended by most of its black victims. This psychological warfare program works so well, in fact, that it not only makes black people more compliant with white dominance over our lives, it in fact makes many black people even prefer white dominance over our lives. It is at the root of the profound division and self-hatred that now plagues our communities. The oppressed will always believe the fraudulent worst about themselves, as Frantz Fanon says. It is time to wake up. While we study our Bibles, believing that it contains the true words of God that will protect us, white oppressive forces studied instead how to hijack the group minds of large targeted populations through their monopoly over the input of what's fed into the targeted population's minds. They then use that gained knowledge to create a psychological prison for the collective minds of black people. There's no task more difficult than trying to show people whose minds have been socially engineered to think in ways that are against their own interests what has been done to them. Because they've normalized it. They've normalized the social engineered mindset. This is why trying to show black people what has been done to us is often as difficult as trying to feed medicine to the dead. Nonetheless, those who know must teach African proverb. We must never underestimate the power of planting seeds of truth within the fertile minds. The time of believing in those idiotic stuff is over. It's time to liberate ourselves. We have now been in this country for more than 400 years. If you're still believe that our plight is connected to a Bible written by our enemies and that we're being controlled by slave syndrome, you are among the ignorant ones. It's time to elevate your mind.